And then Mr. Barnett, would you please come forward? And let me introduce to you our authentic patriot. His name is Kenny Barnett. He is a very dear friend of mine. And his lovely bride, Jeannie, is the one that made this outfit. And they promised me that by the next meeting, I would have mine. So Jeannie, thank you very much for this. And Kenny, thank you very much for all that you do, coming out and supporting. I know you've been to many of Alan West's functions, and it's very much appreciated. Because you bring it to life, my friend. You bring it to life. Thank you.
Everybody 50-50 drawing tickets. Last call, 50-50 drawing.
And I'm going to turn the microphone over to Shannon for just a moment. She's got a couple of introductions as well.
Just real quick, I just appreciate people coming out tonight, and I want to take a special notice that Everett from the South Florida Tea Party is here, and we appreciate him coming by. That's awesome. And Karen from DC Works for Us is here. Karen? 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 She'll be back in a minute. Well, I'll be sure to point her out to you, and I appreciate her coming out and some of her members. That's outstanding. Thank you, Karen.
Now our next guest, our keynote speaker for tonight, if you will. Many of you will recognize the voice. She's been on radio in South Florida for almost 20 years. She started out as a liberal, but she said she converted to conservatism during the Reagan years. She can be heard weekdays, Monday through Friday on channel AM 850 from noon to 3. Please welcome Joyce Kaufman.
Ooh, a microphone. I've never had one of these before. A lollipop. Thank you very much for inviting me and also for being patient, because where are we? Where is this Wellington? It's like been a name on a, on my call screener every now and then. I'll say, Shannon from Wellington. And I'll say, oh, must be right on the, I-95 over there. Where am I? This is like the Everglades. You need a tent to come here. But I apologize, because normally I would have done a GPS, my little guy that talks to me in the car. But someone told me it was easy to get to and gave me these really bad directions. So I just drove around Kenny for a while. But I apologize. This is delightful, just to see people who are activated. I'm convinced that 2010 is going to be the most important year in American history since 1776. But that can't happen just because I wanted to, or just because I think it, or even just because the group of patriots that are gathered here tonight think it. It has to happen because everybody in this group has to make a promise. You don't have to promise it to me, but you at some point are going to have to make a promise that the most important thing that you will do in this year is to convince one other person to become activated, to do something. Because if each one of us were able to bring one more person out of their community, out of their shell, away from their television set, and convince them that there are some things worth fighting for. And the country is definitely one of those things. We have an opportunity to take back this country. And if we don't do it, we're complicit in what's going on. It's not enough to sit around and go, oh, I don't want to see this march towards socialism, and oh, can you believe they're doing the things they're doing? You have to actually have a plan. I say this all the time. We need a plan. We need to be armed. You need to come out. You need to know what candidates stand for. You need to do something different this year than you did last year. Last year was good, but you have to do something different this year. And that something is give up something else and devote the time you were spending on that task, that project, that hobby, to becoming an activist, to being a politically motivated person who writes letters to the editor, who calls their representatives, who knows the candidates and knows the issues, who shows up at a forum where candidates will be speaking. You need to begin to give up other things. I heard, I think it was Shannon or Karen Hoffman, one of you, talking about no more hobbies. We don't have time for hobbies. If you knit, stop. If you're a voracious reader, I'll give you a reading list. It's time to put down the James Patterson novels and all the rest of that stuff and start reading the Federalist Papers. You ought to be able to hold an argument with anybody at any time about what the Founding Fathers meant when they designed this country. They had a plan. You ought to know the plan. You ought to know what the Constitution is all about. You ought to have not only read the Constitution, you ought to have read it with your children, your grandchildren, your neighbor, and anybody else you can convince that you're not utterly boring too. And there's nothing boring about what the work that's lying ahead of us. So it really is time now to change something. Last year was an incredible year. I want you to think about it. The beginning of last year, in January, just a little over a year ago, we watched 1 million people, or more, show up for an inauguration of a man they didn't know. They had a fantasy, they had an illusion, they had hope, they wanted change, they had all of these expectations. They really believed that this was going to be something different and something new. We don't beat them up. We try to show them that it wasn't their fault. I hold the media, I hold politicians who are sitting in Washington today, all of them, every one of those incumbents, I hold them responsible for allowing the largest charlatan masquerade charade to ever be perpetrated against the American people. No question should be asked. If you ask the question, you're a racist. No question should be asked. If you ask a question, you have some sort of religious bigotry or a right-wing nut. We weren't allowed to ask any questions and vet the candidate. That is something we have to learn from. But those people that showed up on the mall, and believe me, a lot of them were my friends, they're beginning to feel really bad about things. That hope is faded. That change, that's all that's left in their pockets. They want somebody else to show them some other way. That's you. That's us. And we can't be angry. Well, I can be angry, crazy, and bitter because I get paid. But you have to be mellow, and you have to be armed with the right kind of information. You have to take people and show them how to begin the process of thinking. This is not a political subject. This is not about being a Democrat. It's not about being a Republican. It's not even about being left or right, because I've been all of those things, and let me tell you something. Most of us, all we want is to be left alone and allowed to find our way in the world. We're willing to work hard. You know, when I heard this nonsense all week long, I'm going to try and keep this short. When I heard this nonsense all week long about the middle class and what it was entitled to, well, I only have my own history in America to go by. I was born into a lower, if any, middle class family in New York City in 1953. And back then, the idea that you would do better than your parents did was just commonplace. My father worked in the United States Post Office. My mother was a hat check girl in the Copacabana Club downtown. Their expectation was that I would get an education and I would have a better chance in life. That my brother would do better than they did. That's how a middle class is built, on opportunity, on an ability to recognize that the dream is achievable. Not on somebody giving me anything. I was never promised anything by my parents. As a matter of fact, when I found out that they didn't pay for me to go to school, I was like amazed at that, because they paid for everything else. You know, the piano lessons, the tap dance classes. I knew they were paying for that because my father would get a second job to pay for those things. And he would disappear at night and go to the Davis and Warshaw Pipe Factory in Brooklyn so that I could have piano lessons or piano or whatever else. So I grew up, I understand what middle class is. I don't know what this president's impression of middle class is. As a matter of fact, I don't know what his impression of being an American is, since he really didn't grow up here. And if you don't play Little League, and you don't go to public schools, and you don't have the American experience, what are you basing middle class experience on? I'm still clueless.